Hi everyone, and welcome to 33 Founders. We're very, very excited to be here today with Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, the founder of Joyus. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, can we start out with you just telling us a little bit about Joyus?
Sure. So Joyus is the web's first video commerce platform. And really, more than a platform, it's an experience. It's tailored at really women 30 to 60 who are interested in learning about products and discovering, watching, shopping, sharing content, leading directly to commerce. So the way to think about us in some ways is sort of a very new version, digitally savvy version of a QVC or HSN business model, which is really using video to enable not just entertainment, but commerce.
Great. And how do your experience as a venture capitalist, Sukhinder, inform the business model at Joyus?
You know, it's interesting. So, I mean, people credit me with being a venture capitalist, but actually far more than being a venture capitalist, I'm an operator. The first part of my career in the Valley, starting a company called Yodely, and then I was at Google for 6 years. But then I did go to Excel for a year trying to study all things commerce and all things media. And I think the things I learned there that really informed Joyus a couple-fold. Number one, certainly no surprise, video consumption, clearly on the rise. And I think of the internet as sort of the new television set, right? It's this entirely new way to distribute content, and in some ways, it is a television set. I don't know about you all, but I watch I watch The Bachelorette or Netflix on
everything on TV.
I want as much as, or I stream it back to my television. So if you think about the internet as this new kind of television set, video consumption continues to be on the rise. So that was sort of piece one, very clear macro trend. Number two, mobile as a driver of video consumption and entertainment content, also clearly on the rise. Over 50% of mobile bandwidth right now is consumed by video. And number three, the big trend that I saw at Excel was really curated commerce and Commerce 3.0, all being about sort of not buying lots of stuff, but what stuff to buy is being the key question now. Like the internet is now proliferated with products. But the real question for women or men is like, of all this stuff, what should I buy? What's good? And so the notion of curated commerce, right, which is a category of commerce that is sort of rising much more quickly than commerce overall, is being a third macro trend. When I saw those three trends, it's very obvious that there's an opportunity to use video as both an entertainment medium as well as to tell kind of special stories about special products and entertain and educate and really drive direct response at the same time. So those are the things I saw in venture capital that really informed Joyus.
Great. And I know, like you said, a lot of that's gone into your business model. And you've explained before that today video content needs to be about depth and not breadth.
Yes.
So instead of selling one of 1,000 different products, you want to sell 1,000 of just one product. Yeah. Can you discuss monetizing video today?
Sure. So I think the reality is if you look at the internet business models, today video is largely still a medium that's monetized by brand advertising. Right, publishers put pre-roll advertising on video, YouTube puts pre-roll advertising on video, and I liken this to sort of the early days of display on the internet before AdWords showed up as like very relevant content that actually was about lead generation, or the way, on television brand advertising showed up before direct response as well. But the reality is, if you follow those analogies, of course video can also be used to drive direct response, right? And while that is new to the internet, it's not new, that's new to online video, it's not new to the internet, it's not new to television. And so the way I think about video monetization is there will be a whole genre of category, a category of monetization for online video that's not just brand advertising, it's direct response advertising. And Joyus in some ways kind of plays to that meme, right? It also plays to the meme of sort of paid content. I mean, a lot of people talk right now about kind of paid content models, content that's like native content, but it monetizes. I mean, Joyus is native content. I mean, it is actually editorial content, but its business model is built in. Like, one of the beautiful things about our videos is that they're both engaging and women like to watch them as entertainment. But if we do our job, it also leads to commerce directly.
You get both right, for sure.
And we try and get both right. I mean, I think in that way, maybe it is like online AdWords. I mean, if you think about Google, like whether you look at the right hand or the left hand side, the content is good on both sides and it's relevant, right? And that's what makes advertising work and monetization work on Google, because an AdWords ad is as relevant as some of the organic content. And Joyus is sort of both. It is organic content, but it is about commerce.
So once you have someone let's say I get a Pilates DVD and I love it, how are you going to drive me to come back to Joyus and be a repeat customer?
It's a great question. I mean, so in this way, we think about the means of both best commerce companies as well as content companies. So we have two means of driving back. Number one, we can say it's not true, but it is. Email works. Once you have somebody's email, in a world where you're always inundated with content, the reality is that we are a push model. We push you new video, largely through email, and it works. I mean, now it works because our content is good and women want to open the emails, but we still do use email, like many commerce companies do, to drive interaction, right? But I think some of the other ways we think about kind of remonetizing the customer are super simple. Like, yes, there's things like retargeting and other things that commerce companies use. But for us, the other way is we syndicate our content. Mm-hmm. So if you think about the world of online video, the reality is it's very fragmented, right? You might be watching a piece of video on Joyus, you might be watching it on People Magazine, you might be watching it on AOL or your ISP, you might be watching it on your smart TV. So I think besides email, we actually do count on content syndication for people to discover our content again. So even if you're a repeat customer, you may in fact not come back through email, you might come back through search, but you might also come back through people.com where you saw our first video. I mean, that's something that really happens. We syndicate our content across the internet to other publishing partners, and we see actually a decent amount of repeat visitors who come back through the first place they browse the content. So they saw a video on People, and they come back and watch another video through People, even though they are also on our email list.
And now, before the recording, I had mentioned that I have a video production company, and I guess what Jen and I are doing is also pretty video relevant. So we want to know how you guys are ensuring that you're producing these consistently beautiful videos in a scalable way, especially maybe before you guys got funding.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I guess the fundamental thing I believe about kind of Commerce 3.0 and even great brands is that generally one of the great promises of great brands is consistent creative quality. You see it at First Dibs, you see it at One Kings Lane, you see it, even on video sites, right? I mean, premium video sites are not just about taking anybody's content, it's about ensuring a rich experience. You even see it on Tumblr, which is crowdsourced, right? Why is that? I think one of the things we want to do is we want to set the tenor for the quality of video merchandising we wanted to see happen on Joyus. And the way we did that is we had our own production studios. We have our own production studios. So the first way we ensured it is we set the bar on what we thought the content quality should be. And more importantly, in our case, because we're trying to drive commerce, there's also a lot of data, right, that goes into that. It's not about just a beautiful video. We want to have a beautiful production studio plus analytics to tell us what was working. So the first way we ensure that quality is by doing it ourselves, and we believed it was really important.
So everything's in-house.
Everything's in-house today. However, once we've learned what we do, we also think it's very possible to teach other people to do what we do. It turns out in our business that the long pole or the hardest thing about video commerce is not actually producing a great story. It's about having a great product. It's actually merchandising. And number two, it's about great storytelling, which often is less even about the production quality we put in something. It's about the quality of the storyteller, right? And so I think it's actually possible to crowdsource those things. I think it's possible for us to take those learnings and to share it in generation 2 or 3 of our model. Like maybe we have, I don't envision us growing our production studios infinitely. What I imagine us doing is creating an improved network of curators, or curators that we think are great storytellers and inviting them into our model, or even crowdsourcing them. And I imagine that we can do the same with production. So I think that it's about setting the bar and controlling the consumer experience. And I think once you set the bar, one of the great things about the internet and smart people everywhere is once they see the bar, they all rise to it, right? Generally speaking, you see this happen. So I wouldn't cut out the idea that Joyus, it also, can move to a more of a crowdsourced model. But for me, it's about creating an editorial standard that we want to see upheld and we think is important to the consumer. And then I think it's about finding or creating an ecosystem around ourselves to scale that, beyond just employing everybody ourselves.
Gotcha. And now my next question comes from Cora, actually, and they want to know what you've learned since you've launched. I'm sure it's a huge amount of information, so feel free.
Well, I'm impressed that somebody on Cora wants to answer that question. So is it what have I learned about video commerce, or what have I learned about entrepreneurship? What have I learned about what?
I suppose just about entrepreneurship. What have you learned about the results of video commerce?
Yeah, so why don't I divide it into the substance of kind of video and what have I learned, and the substance of sort of entrepreneurship. So
perfect.
I think if I had to boil the ocean on this question, try and come to sort of what have I learned about video commerce. So first of all, the most important thing is that actually it works, right? One of the big unknowns in any new model, business model, is like, is it actually going to work? the reality is, like, in some ways, Joyce seems very complex. But in practice, the idea that people would watch a video and learn something and it would trigger them to buy, it just works. I guess that's the first learning. I didn't know that it would work. It does. I think it's an important one. So the idea for me that direct response will be a whole category for monetization in online video, like, it's true. Like, just take it as a truth, right? And we do it for products. Other people, obviously, like Craftsy and others, are doing it for digital content where you just subscribe to the content, right? It's another form of video commerce. So I'd say the biggest learning in video commerce is it's coming, right? There are many ways. You can do it through subscription. You can do it by selling products. You can do it by selling, knowledge. It's happening. We see it right now in all the online video models. And we have a different take of it because we're entirely product-centric. And a lot of other people are actually selling subscription content, for fitness or for, other types of knowledge. But it's happening, period. I think the other thing, that I would think about in the video commerce space is, the reality is that the hurdle rate in video today continues to be first and foremost about a great editorial standard. Video content is very fragmented right now, and you can sort of start from the bottom or you can start from the top. I would say that in relevance to things like product in particular, like the representation of the product and starting with premium video actually does matter. You could say that in other areas, why didn't we crowdsource our content? But I think that when I look at the best brands in commerce, a lot of the key learnings there are, consolidating the creative is really important. Like, look at House, right? House is a content and a commerce company. Like, the creative matters for Dibs, the creative matters. One Kings Lane, the creative matters. So I think when you try and merchandise a product through video, in fact, it does need to look beautiful. There is something to that in creating aspiration inside of a commerce experience. And so my other key learning is, look, I think for many categories of content, in video content, it may be fine to crowdsource, but I think when it comes to selling product, in any of the great brands we think about, the quality of creative in Commerce 3.0 matters a ton. And so regardless of how it's generated, that needs to be a key premise for online video commerce. In terms of what I've learned about entrepreneurship, I guess the old reminder that things take a lot longer than you think they will is certainly true. When I was at Yodlee, we started doing mobile data applications in 1999. It didn't, it was 10 years later when Mint built on top of Yodlee's platform that the idea of financial data platforms, and applications for the consumer took stock, right? 10 years, later than when we had the original vision and created the platform. I think I'm reminded about the same thing with Joyus. Anything really, really great takes time. I'm by nature incredibly impatient. And, I'm always reminded when I run Joyus, Jim Collins, if you guys are familiar with him, wrote the book Good to Great. And he talks about this notion of a hedgehog strategy, which is what is this thing that you can be best in the world at, for which you have a unique core competency and a great business model. And he's like, you can try and just lock yourself in a conference room and figure it out, but on average, it takes companies 4 years to find it, at least in the good to great companies. And he kind of profiled in his book. And you can only get there through iteration, and I think that is a reminder. Like, every day at Joyus, I realize that though it seems like a lifetime to me, we're 3 years in, and we're and it's taken longer than I thought to get the lessons, but there was almost no other way to get here than to get the lessons, than to just iterate your way through it. So I think it's just a reminder of that model. It's true. You find your hedgehog strategy by iterating your way through it. And the inflection point doesn't come from some moment without knowledge that just pops into your head. It comes from just pivoting 1 to 2 at 5 degrees at a time. And then you sort of get there, right? It's your pivotal moment for the company.
One of the important ways that you guys have done that, Sukhinder, is you've emphasized that the reason Joyus products are so popular is because they're unique and they're often hard to find.
Yeah.
And when I first learned about this, I was a little bit confused, and you shared that this is actually great because now Joyus is the primary spot for these products. So you're not competing with Amazon and Macy's and big companies out there. You become a hub of great products directly related to what I'm looking for. Can you elaborate on this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, look, it's funny, right? Because at the end of the day, I grew up at, Yodlee and Google, and I was the CEO of Polyvore before Joyus, and so I believe in platform plays. I believe in great engineering, great product design, scale, technology. But I will tell you, there's a reason why the best brands in the world, are about great product and great merchandising and a lot about art, not just science, right? If you were to look at Apple, I mean, it's beautifully designed product. If you were to look at J.Crew, Mickey Drexler is just an extraordinary merchant. Like it's just part of his DNA. Look at Burberry. Look at, if you even think about how eBay eBay started, it started with antique collectibles. At the end of the day, one of the things you find is true in great commerce companies and great commerce brands, Nike. I mean, it's about great product. And you can't get around that. And technology does not solve that. Like at the end of the day, that last mile is about great product, right? And about the art of finding great product. And I can't say I have it. I've got a wonderful team. I just brought in a president at Joyus who comes out of merchandising, and he's our chief merchandising officer. And I can't name what he has, but it's an instinct on product. And that is art. And again, at Apple, that instinct may be about user design, right? It's an art. It's not just a science. And so that's the most I can tell you about it. Like, I think the best commerce companies in the world, including technology-oriented ones, get that combination right of like seamless, ease, convenience, great user design, great web experience, but most importantly, great product. That's what you guys remember, right? You bought something and you loved it.
That is exactly what I remember, because even as we were talking before the interview, I recalled a great hair product that we got from Joyce, and it is what stays with you. And I like how you said that technology isn't going to solve that. It's still about the core product.
Yeah, it's still about art, right? It's the reason that all these subjective categories and lifestyle categories, you can't just pin them down to technology. Like, there's some essence, and often the essence, again, in commerce is about like, you may remember Zappos because they gave you a service, but I guarantee you also remember Zappos because you found a pair of shoes you just loved and you're obsessed with them, and you got the great service. Right? It's not just enough to have an easy experience. If the product's not memorable.
So is it most efficient then to focus on mastering that art of getting that product right?
It's interesting. I would say that at Joyce, part of the journey has certainly been, we feel like we need to get the art and the science right at the same time. And that's what makes it so hard. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the faint of heart to say, look, you've got to get great storytelling, and you've got to have great analytics, and you've got to have a great platform. And by the way, you need to have great product in it. I mean, I think that one of the things that makes Joyus both kind of a wonderful company and also a challenging company, it's by far the most heterogeneous company I've ever run. You have to get a few things right. You can't just get one thing right. And there are days I envy the companies where it's like, you just got one thing right. Now, what I can tell you is at the center of our experience, if you don't get product right, you can forget about all the other pieces. That is certainly true. We always talk about it at Joyce. It's like, look, it starts with great merchandising. Like, it has to, because if you make the center anything else and you get that piece wrong, it doesn't matter how beautiful the website is, how easy it is, how beautiful the video, like none of it will matter. Our data tells us that what matters is that you love the product first. So there's a first among equals at Joyus, for sure, in merchandising. But in our case, you actually have to get a bunch of things right. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the secret sauce that we think about all day long is like the execution complexity of getting it all right is hard. And it's not for the faint of heart. And, we'll see if we get there. We hope so.
You will. Anyway, so after being president of Asian and Latin American operations at Google, you are an expert in international expansion. So how can startups premeditate this international expansion in their business model from day one?
It's interesting. I actually am of two minds on international. So I think that number one, there are things that are easy to do product-wise internationally, and there are things that are actually much more difficult, right? So the first thing you need to do is bifurcate, right? Like making the decision to build a platform that is I-18N, super important, right? But interestingly, only important in certain sectors, like media companies, super important. And companies that are about information and knowledge exchange generally seem to be companies that cross borders pretty easily, right? So from day one, the idea of having a global product is incredibly important when you think about things like knowledge exchange. Like for a Quora or a Google, like super important from day one, and you're going to see a lot of international traffic. Things like commerce, actually, there's a pretty good argument. Commerce is so much in many ways within borders, like just because of logistics issues, as well as kind of even some forms of merchandising, like fashion, incredibly local, right? Incredibly local. There's a few brands that are global, but a lot that are incredibly local. So let's put commerce aside for a second. Media companies, you may think from day one, what are the easy things you can do on the product side to get there? In commerce, it may be the easiest thing you can do on the product side is actually international shipping, right? Because the localization of actually taste is actually a very different thing. The localization of product, taste, and then fulfillment and logistics and 3-day service and all the other things you have to do in commerce to be great. It may imply that like shipping might be the easiest first step. So my view on expansion is a couplefold. Number one, what are the easy things you can do at the product level? Tackle those first before you go to the next mile of what's hard. So tackle what's common and that you can build into your product design first, right? And let that drive then data on what's working before you make in-depth decisions, if that makes sense. Because I think a lot of people want to jump to the idea that you should sort of be international from day one and pick the hardest stuff first. I'm like, no, pick the easiest stuff first. And then let the data tell you where there's resonance before you make the decision to go commit resources, right? I think that's a key piece. And then the other thing is, which is probably obvious, everybody wants to be international from day one everywhere. But the reality, I think, of most businesses is that it's hard to be international from day one everywhere. There's a hierarchy of order. Even in international, there's an 80-20 rule on which countries will make you money. So even there, you have to have, it may be better for you to go deep in 2 countries because you're going to make all your money there versus being broad everywhere. So I think like build at the product level, breadth. And then you're going to have to make in-depth decisions if you want to actually monetize international.